The night settles differently on old roads, not the kind marked by signs or lamps, but the narrow paths that curve through fields, that slip between hedgerows, that remember hooves better than wheels. Tonight, as sleep begins to take hold, we journey into the foggy space between folklore and fear. If you're listening under moonlight or nestled in the quiet of your room, feel free to share your setting in the comments. These stories take on new life when we hear where they are being dreamt. This is the tale of the Dullahan, pronounced Dullahan, a headless rider from the old countryside of Ireland, a figure bound not to castles or courts, but to roads, to thresholds, to the places where one moment gives way to the next. Settle in, breathe deep, and let your thoughts drift into the unknown. Welcome to Fairy Tales After Dark. Long before clocks ruled the night, before lanterns softened the dark, the Irish countryside belonged to sound and shadow. Hooves on packed earth, wind moving through tall grass, the distant lowing of cattle, and the hush that followed, when the world seemed to pause and listen. It was along these roads, often at dusk, sometimes long after midnight, that the Dullahan was said to ride, not in haste, not in anger, but with certainty. The rider did not carry his head upon his shoulders. Instead, he held it beneath one arm, its eyes open, its mouth drawn into a fixed and knowing smile. A smile said to see farther than any living gaze. A smile that needed no lantern to light the way. The horse beneath him was no ordinary beast. It was described as coal-black, its hooves striking sparks from stone, its breath steaming even in summer air. Where the rider passed, dogs fell silent. Locks slid shut on their own, and those who heard him coming learned not to look too closely. For when the Dullahan stopped riding, when he called a name aloud, that name was never spoken twice, in the oldest tellings. The rider did not chase, he did not hunt, he did not threaten. He arrived, he spoke, and he departed. The Dullahan was not an executioner. He was an announcer, a boundary marker, a voice at the edge of what could no longer be delayed. In this way, he belonged to the land itself. Irish folklore is rich with figures who dwell at thresholds, at river crossings, at crossroads, at moments where choice fades and consequence remains. The Dullahan rides these same spaces, appearing where paths divide, where journeys pause, where the living hesitate. He does not demand attention. He does not explain himself. He is simply there, because something has already been decided. Those who heard the rider were said to feel it before they understood it. A sudden stillness, a tightening of the air, a sense that time had narrowed. The sound of hooves would come first, slow, measured, unrushed. Then the voice, calling clearly, calmly, without malice. No plea could stop it, no door could bar it. The Dullahan was said to pass through locks and gates as though they were no more solid than mist. In some accounts, he carried a whip, not of leather, but of human spine, used not to strike, but to signal, to point, to remind. These details were not meant to frighten, they were meant to instruct, to teach listeners that death was not chaos. It had order, timing, rules older than kings. The roads he favors are not grand ones. They wind because the land winds. They curve because stone and water insist they must. These are roads shaped by repetition, by feet, by hooves, by years of walking the same way home. Roads that remember who has passed over them. Roads that know the difference between leaving and returning. It is here, in these quiet places, that the legend takes root. In the countryside where the story first took shape, death was not hidden away. It was not softened by distance or ceremony. It lived near the road, near the field, near the home. People understood that endings were part of the landscape, as natural as fog settling low, as certain as the tide pulling back from shore. The Dullahan fit into this understanding easily, not as a terror, but as a sign that the world had reached a turning point. This is why he appears most often at crossroads. Crossroads are not simply places where roads meet. They are places where intention thins, where one direction becomes many, where certainty dissolves into choice. To stand at a crossroads at night is to feel the weight of possibility pressing close. The Dullahan rides through these places because they already belong to him. They are moments suspended between what has been and what cannot be avoided. Those who believed in the rider did not shout his name. They did not dare him to appear. They behaved carefully instead. They kept gold close, a coin in a pocket, a ring worn not for beauty, but for grounding. Gold was said to remind the rider of the living world, to mark a boundary, to say, "Not here." Windows were shuttered early, candles were set low, not to light the way, but to soften the dark. The goal was never to confront the Dullahan, only to let him pass without notice, and he always did. There are no stories of him lingering, no tales of negotiation, no bargains struck at the roadside. Once the name was spoken, the road returned to silence. This restraint is what makes the legend endure. As years passed, the world changed. Lanterns became common, roads widened, villages grew into towns. The night lost some of its authority, and yet the story remained. It remained because it adapted. In later tellings, people began to describe things the earliest accounts left unsaid. Details added not out of fear, but out of imagination, a need to see what had always been felt. Some spoke of a glow. Not a flame meant to guide, not a lantern held aloft, but a pale presence, a cold light, often described as blue. This glow was never warm, never flickering, never alive in the way fire is alive. It did not dance, it did not cast shadows. It simply existed, steady, distant, like moonlight resting on frost. In these versions, the light does not lead the rider, it follows him, a quiet echo, a residue of something already decided. This detail belongs to later centuries, to storytellers who lived farther from the road, who needed an image to accompany the silence. What remains consistent, even in these newer tellings, is the Dullahan's purpose. He does not cause death, he does not choose it, he announces it. This distinction matters. The writer is not cruel, he does not take pleasure in his role, he is not angry, he is not vengeful, he is simply precise. Like the tolling of a bell, like the falling of night, unavoidable, but not malicious. As the story spread beyond Ireland, it began to mingle with other legends, other headless riders, other figures of the road. Some borrowed from him, some gave back, but the original shape remained beneath it all. A rider, a road, a name spoken once. Everything else is ornament. And ornaments fall away with time. Now, as the night around you grows quieter, and your thoughts drift more slowly from one image to the next, the roads of the story begin to empty, the crossroads fade, the rider passes unseen, only the sense of inevitability remains. Calm, orderly, without fear. This is how the legend was meant to be carried. Not as a warning shouted into the dark, but as a truth spoken softly, and then allowed to rest as the hours stretch. The countryside changes its posture. What was once evening becomes something quieter. Fields lose their edges, trees become silhouettes. The air cools in small increments, almost imperceptible, as though the land itself is easing into rest. This is the time the old stories lingered in, not the moment of dusk, but the long middle of the night, when nothing new happens, and nothing needs to. The roads remain, empty now, carrying only the memory of travel. Wheel ruts soften. Footprints fade, the ground smooths itself, as if preparing to forget. In these hours, sound travels farther, and then, eventually, not at all. An owl calls once, and then falls silent. A distant animal shifts, settles. Breath becomes the loudest thing in the world. This is where the Dullahan belongs most fully, not in the telling of his arrival, but in the stillness that surrounds it. The long pause before, and the quiet after. He does not disturb the night, he moves within it, like fog along a hedgerow, like shadow sliding across stone. If hooves were ever heard, they are not now. If a name was ever spoken, it has already dissolved into the dark. Nothing remains to be done. Generations once passed these hours by listening. Stories were not told to entertain. They were told to occupy the silence, to give shape to the waiting, to remind those awake that the night was not empty, only patient. The Dullahan was one such story, not whispered urgently, but spoken evenly, calmly, as one might describe the weather, or the coming of winter, or the turning of a season. Children learned it not as a threat, but as a certainty. One more truth among many, no more frightening than the knowledge that morning always followed night. And so the story stayed. The land learned it too. Roads carried it forward. Fields absorbed it. The story settled into stone and soil, passed down not only through words, but through familiarity. A pause before crossing a crossroads at night. A glance down an empty road. A sense that some moments deserved respect. These were the story's echoes. Even as time moved on, and lamps replaced lanterns, and roads were widened and straightened, the old paths remained beneath them. Quiet, patient, remembering. Some stories do not need to be retold to endure. They simply remain, waiting for the night to grow long enough again. Now, as the hours deepen, and thought begins to loosen its hold, the countryside returns to that older rhythm. Nothing approaches, nothing follows, only the road, stretching gently forward, without urgency, without demand. The legend does not ask to be believed, it asks only to be allowed to rest, and in that rest, it keeps watch. So you do not have to. As night deepens now, and your thoughts begin to slow, imagine those old roads once more, empty, unlit, curving gently through the land. No rider approaches, no hooves sound against the earth. The hedgerows stand still, the fields breathe quietly. Whatever once moved through these places has passed on, leaving only the memory of motion behind. This is how the story always ends. Not with fear, not with spectacle, but with absence. The Dullahan does not remain. He does not linger in the way monsters do. He appears only long enough to fulfill his role. Then he returns the road to silence, as though he had never been there at all. This is why the legend feels different from others. It does not cling. It does not demand attention. It teaches by passing through, by leaving nothing behind but understanding. The quiet that follows a story like this is not empty. It has weight. It has shape. It settles gradually, like mist filling a low field, like darkness pressing softly against the edges of a room. This is the quiet people once lived with, before constant sound, before the night was crowded with voices and light. A quiet that did not need to be filled, only acknowledged. In that quiet, the mind wanders less, it slows. Thoughts lose their urgency, they drift instead of pulling forward. One image dissolves into the next, without effort. This is where stories such as this were meant to rest. When the Dullahan passed from a road, he left no trace behind him, no mark in the soil, no lingering sound. The land closed around the moment as though it had never opened. This is not loss, it is completion. The road does not mourn the rider. The field does not remember the name. Everything returns to its place. This is why the legend endures without spectacle. It does not compete with the world. It moves alongside it, appearing only when the night grows long enough to hold it. Long ago, people understood this rhythm instinctively. They did not rush the night. They did not fight the dark. They allowed it to arrive, to settle, to carry them where it would. Stories were part of that permission. A way to let go without fear. A way to rest while something else kept watch. The Dullahan was never meant to be watched closely. He was meant to pass through awareness, like a thought that fades as sleep takes hold. As you lie here now, the world beyond you continues its slow turning. Roads stretch quietly through memory. Fields rest beneath the sky. Whatever once moved through them has found its place. Nothing waits for you tonight. Nothing calls your name. There is only the steady presence of the moment, complete, untroubled, enough. This is where the story releases you, not with an ending, but with space. Space to breathe, space to drift, space where nothing needs to happen next. The legend has finished its work. The road is empty, the night is wide, and you are free to rest within it. In the quiet that follows, the land reclaims itself. Grass bends back into place, the wind moves on, footsteps fade. Even the crossroads lose their weight, becoming once again only a meeting of paths, nothing more. This is the mercy hidden inside the story, that endings, however final, do not disturb the world forever. They arrive, they pass, and life continues in their wake. Those who first told this legend understood that truth. They lived close to the land, close to birth and loss, close to cycles that did not pause for explanation. They did not need the Dullahan to frighten them. They needed him to remind them that death had shape, that it followed rules, that it came when it must, and not a moment sooner. In giving death a rider, they made it familiar enough to face and distant enough to sleep beside. Now the story loosens its grip. The rider fades into the hedgerows. The glow of later tellings dims. The roads stretch on without ceremony, carrying only the memory of where they have led before. If a name was ever spoken, it has already been carried away by the night. Nothing follows it now. As you rest here, let the story do what it was always meant to do. Let it stand watch. Let it keep time. So you do not have to. The land remembers. Even when we sleep, the road continues. Even when we stop walking it, and the stories remain, quietly, patiently, waiting only to be remembered again. For now, there is nothing more to consider, nothing more to follow, only the slow rhythm of breath. And the comfort of knowing that even the darkest legends were once told softly, by firelight, to help people rest. Settle in, breathe deep, and let your thoughts drift into the unknown. This has been Fairy Tales After Dark.